Okay, Grandma, welcome back.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming and helping me.
I love you, Grandma.
I love you more.
So you wanted to tell me a little something about now. Which farm is this that you wanted to?
This is the Pfizer farm.
Okay.
The first farm we lived at was called the Weaver Farm, which was just a few miles from um, Maysville in an area called Minerva. And I just checked on Google, and even today they only have about 60 as a population for the little local burg that you drive
Really?
through.
60
But I
people.
found out that my mom and dad lived there for 9 years. I did not know that.
Hmm.
And the other thing that was interesting is my mom and dad were secretly married before they told any of the family.
Now, why was that?
So I don't know.
Oh,
They just did not want to have the uh, area of thinking about having to be in the same household, but they cared about each other and they knew they wanted to be married to each other, so they were secretly married for several years.
and okay. So at what age was that you think they?
That's what am trying to find out.
Hmm.
There are not any records that I can trace back to their marriage date.
Really?
And I know they were married several years before my brother was born, which
Wow.
was 1938.
Huh.
And then 1940 was my birth. So families were very determined and dedicated to helping take care of their family members. So I think that my dad probably was helping take care of his own mother and sister. That would be Aunt Elsie and Grandma Hannah Emmons.
How old were your parents when they had you, or and Uncle Punky?
That's a good question. Um, from 1914 to 1938 would be 24
24.
years for my brother, and then 26 for me. Our birthdays being one day apart,
Yeah.
2 years. So
So your mom was 24
evidently,
at the time.
when my brother was born.
Okay. And how about your dad?
My dad was born in 1902.
Okay.
So from 1902 to 1938 would be 36 years old. He
Got
was
it.
he was 12 years older than Mom, evidently.
Hmm.
And we were born, and I guess it was on the Weaver farm because I found out they lived there for 9 years,
Yeah.
and then moved to the Pfizer farm. And I'm thinking that we were probably on the Pfizer farm for maybe a year because, as I mentioned before, people moved on farms in the cold weather
Hmm.
because that's when you could be ready to start a crop in the springtime. And I just have a feeling that's when most people did move. So I'm guessing.
Hmm.
And I was 5 when I started to school, and my brother was in the second grade. He was always 1 year older than me,
Yeah.
and but just 1 year, 2 years older, but 1 year above me in school.
Did you have to go far for school? Like how far was it?
The thing is, I believe our lane out to the main road where the school bus met was probably, I'm sure it was a mile over a
Really?
very narrow little dirt lane. And in this house where we lived, the thing I wanted to remember to share today was the fact that we had a well that was not a pump well, but it was either, and I'm trying to recall, because I know we have remembered going to a spring before where you just dip the water into
Hmm.
a hole in the ground, but you
Right.
had a cover over it. And I just don't recall if there was a bucket that was lowered by one of those turn controls that you see in pictures.
Hmm.
And but I know it was one of the two. We had no phone, no electricity.
Wow.
When you when it turned evening, you either sat by the fire and had the lamp on low. You had a kerosene lamp, which I have one to show, but it was just a real humble kind of thing that I think about now, but it's all we understood, so we just lived with it and we're happy.
What do you think about like how does it feel to have all this stuff now, like electricity and lights and TV and computers and internet? Like, how does it make you feel versus because you've experienced both, like having nothing and now all of a sudden you're in this amazing technology age.
Well, I tell you, the difference from when I started as a young child to what there is now is absolutely phenomenal when you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just I appreciate what we have. Some of it I'm a little bit afraid of, and I liked what we had. And I wanted to tell you another interesting tidbit. When farmers did their work, it had to be when there was no rain happening.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to go to town when it rained. That was a little benefit. It was a fun thing. And one of the few times we would go would be, as I said, when it rained, but then it would kind of lay off a little bit when we were there. But we would get to eat a meal there.
Really?
And it was a place that I recalled, Morgan's little restaurant, and it was a big open window in a tiny little restaurant that you could see the man. It was part of the display that he would be cooking and making burgers in the front window.
Really?
Or making bacon, whatever. And you go in there, it was a long, narrow, little humble restaurant, but it was a fun place to go. And that's where we had the little, we'd always get a burger or a bowl of chili. It was nothing elegant and some people got a plate lunch. That was really fancy.
Oh, what was that?
It just meant you got some potatoes and some beans or some meat with it.
Full course, like
Yeah,
a bunch of stuff.
yeah.
Okay.
And it was a little bit fancier. But there was one other place we would go, and it was called Elites. And they were a special little place where I'm trying to think of their heritage, but they just cooked different kind of food. And one of the treats we would have when we'd go there was like an open-faced roast beef sandwich. And it had gravy on top of it. Oh, is that ever fine? So that was really, really nice. And I was going to tell you about, show you the little cream servers that they had with the mugs of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Was like I had here before, one of these. And this is the kind they had in the restaurant.
Yeah.
The little fancier ones that I have are from.
It looks good. It came through clear. It looks good.
Can you see it?
Yeah, it looks good. Yeah.
Okay. Want me to show you?
Yeah, sure. You can show the camera again. So
Yeah.
they put milk in these little things. And
Oh yeah, cream in those little things.
Yeah.
And everybody got a little creamer with their cup of coffee, and the cup was always a thick, heavy mug that was very durable. So
Yeah.
when it got washed or dropped, it would have another life. And most of the places there actually had wooden floors. There were no cement floors that much in the town. And so that was one of the fun little things I remember about the creamers and the coffee mugs being very durable.
So when it was
plates.
when it was a rainy day, you almost got excited because you knew you were going into town.
And I would get to go into the dime store and look around. And I can remember you could buy something of a nice little treat for 12 cents.
So what's a dime? What is that? What is a dime store?
It's a 5 and 10 cent store where it was just understood to be very inexpensive little items. Or if you went to get a pair of jeans or whatever, it was a little bit less than the other kind of stores. It was, or we call it a 10-cent store even.
Mm-hmm.
But we'd go to that little town and have more fun. and then go home and think it was a big day. But I was going to try to remember to share that part with you
Oh yeah.
that we only got to go when it rained.
So, did your parents try to like, or whoever took you into town? Did they like sort of do tasks like shopping?
Oh, evidently, yes.
Yeah.
We would always go if there was a bill that we needed to pay something
Oh,
on, like a
interesting.
little loan. You didn't mail it in the check. You went to the place, and it was a fun reason to get to
Yeah.
go to town.
Things to do.
So we'd. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to remember to tell you, we at first had cream that we sold, not just the milk.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a little piece of equipment that it was called a cream separator that had little arms on it. I don't know how the thing functioned, and I've barely seen any through the years, but it divided the milk from the cream, and we'd take that to town to a lady named Mrs. Gollenstein at the cream station. And cream cans were smaller than milk cans because it was, the condensed form of the milk product.
Mm-hmm.
And they stood about maybe 2 feet tall. A milk can, I think, was about 10 gallons of milk. And it was all mixed together, just the regular milk and the cream would come to the top.
Yeah.
But you'd get this cream tested. She would take a test tube and she would draw up a little bit, with a pipette and test the cream and see how well it tested and paid you accordingly.
Interesting.
So we'd go to town, maybe every so many days, like once a week or something like that. I don't recall. And the other thing is, when it rained, we either stayed in and did other kinds of work, like in the house. I was so little, I didn't do any work, that in that sense.
Yeah.
But my mom would sew, and she had a Singer pedal machine,
Wow.
and she would do that. Or if it was harvest time, she would make good use of peeling something or canning or whatever. And she had to put the jars into a large container and boil them for so long to have the product not spoil.
To seal it, is that what that was for?
Pardon?
They boiled it to seal it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So many, they knew how long to do it. They have a little
Wow.
kit, and that's how they saved all their produce for the winter. Potatoes, you did not have to do that.
Just left them out.
Potatoes, well, you dug them up, and if you wanted them to keep well, you just kept them from freezing, because remember, it got very cold back there. So to keep the potatoes from freezing, and I'll tell you about another thing on the Fred Adams farm, but not the first farm we had. Anyway, we didn't worry about the potatoes too much. They just kept until spring, and then they'd start to sprout, and you cut them in sections and plant them. And I have some out there growing from the store that I had to sprout. So we canned all of our food, and I might have mentioned this. I might be redundant, but
No, it's okay.
if we went to town, it was like what you see on the Western movies. All you needed was baking powder, salt, flour, coffee, and if we were lucky, we got a little handful of jelly beans, which were not something I can recall I ever.
Jelly beans, really?
Yeah, but sometimes even the storekeeper would give you a little treat, a little piece of candy or something like that. But we didn't have any foolishness on our grocery list. And anyway, one of the longest things that it took to preserve or can in those jars was it was a strange thing. Oh, corn takes a long time to cook.
Really?
Yeah, it took like an hour or something. And I'm skipping ahead, but one of the things my dad bought my mom for a nice treat was a pressure canner. Mind you, all the things that we cooked were on a coal and wood stove, and mostly wood because coal was a little more expensive, and you saved that for other kinds of times.
What would you save it for? The coal?
What we
Like, so you said coal, you would save it. What would you save the coal for?
Oh, for like if company came or if we were feeling really, we had a coal pile, it's called.
Oh, really?
And you just go out and gather in some coal. And or really cold weather, very very cold, we'd use because it was a little more powerful than the wood.
Oh, okay. It burned
But
hotter.
yeah, burned a little hotter. So we did that, and anyway, my dad bought her a pressure canner, which really cut down the timing of what she would have to do, and it was so much quicker. The pressure would come up, and
Can you describe it to me?
time it.
I have no idea what this would look like.
A pressure canner?
Is it like a pot or?
Oh, I have one in the garage. I'll bring it in and show it to you.
Next
Different time. Next time.
Yeah, but it's the same concept. You put the jars in.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
Put the jars in, but it worked on the process of steam, which is hotter than boiling water. And then you timed it once the pressure came up. Oh, was that ever a gem for my mother? It saved her loads of time.
Yeah.
So, anyway, we're back on the Pfizer farm, I guess, and
I wanted to ask you real quick.
yeah.
What did your parents do for leisure? I mean, when they had free time, maybe if it was raining and like you didn't go into town, and they just wanted to like do leisure activity. What would your mom and dad like do for fun?
That's interesting you would ask. I know my dad did a little bit of whittling, but not a lot, and he didn't play the fiddle or the violin on his free time. He only kind of did that when somebody was there. So sometimes I think he would go out into a building and work on something, like a little project that he had been planning and do a little something out there. But I don't recall him sitting around. He did not read a lot. Mom might have read a lot. She probably did some of that, but she would do sewing. And but my dad would have to do inside work, until it was time to go out and milk the cows, and that happened morning and night, whether it rained or not. So he would go out and gather the cows in and do that. But sometimes, I know one thing he might do. He might go out and work at cleaning up the stalls in the cow barn, because you'd have to do that ever so often, and clean that out or chop wood. He could do that probably under a shelter of one of the buildings.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was going to tell you about my mom, about her schooling thing. Mom was taught by that grandpa that loved to teach her, and she was able to skip grades, totally skip grades. They would test her, I guess, and figure out what she was okay with, and there are many grades. I wish I had written it down when she told me, but she skipped a lot of grades.
Really?
Skipped a lot of grades.
Wow.
And that was just because of that extra little homework her grandpa was helping her with. And I can remember at the Pfizer farm, Lulabelle, who was her, I guess you call it half-sister, by the second marriage of my grandpa. She did a writing back and forth with the military man. I don't know that she ever met him before she accepted and married him. But it was a military kind of back and forth communication, and his name was Uncle Charlie Griffin, and we all loved him. He was just a real fine gentleman, and He lived in Florida. It was his home base area, I guess. And when she got married, she went there, and then we'd have to go there to visit her as one of the sisters, you know.
Wow.
And I have one picture of my grandpa and and the Lulabelle's two little girls standing there with him, and we got to go a few times and
You went
visit
to
her.
Florida.
To Florida on the
Wow.
bus, yeah.
What was Florida like back then?
Florida was pretty warm in the summer, I'm sure, but I think we probably went different times of the year because we didn't really notice the heat all that much. And I have a picture of Uncle Charlie Griffin, that was his name, with two alligators. Alligators were just a real prominent
Wow.
thing down there,
Huh.
and he has them in his yard where he had evidently. And I have eaten alligator meat, and it's quite fine.
What?
Yes, it tastes kind of like it's good meat, just like kind of like chicken,
Really?
like the breast meat of chicken. Yeah,
Huh.
a little denser or darker, but it was very good
When did you eat crocodile?
at their house.
Really?
Yeah,
Did he serve you
absolutely.
crocodile?
I kid you not, and there's
Dang.
nothing to be bothered by because it was just part of their routine, and it was a treat for them to give
Wow.
us that. Yeah.
Alligator was a treat back then.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, but it
That
was
was.
part of their existence, you know.
Huh.
They lived by water, and so anyway, when we went to visit, it was always pretty pleasant. I don't remember being uncomfortable,
Hmm.
but it was steamy hot in the summer. I know that had to
Yeah.
be. So now where were we? My brother and I think this is a picture of my brother and me and our dog.
Oh goodness.
And his name, I believe, was Bowser.
Bowser.
Bowser, yeah. That's
Wow.
one of my favorite little pictures of my brother and me. And
Wow.
yeah,
So you got that car in the back. What is that car?
that was Frank and Ida McCann, which Ida was one of Mom's relatives on the plumber side of the family, and she married a gentleman named Frank McCann. He was a great man.
Hmm.
They always had fine cars. Whatever was the state of the art at the time, he had. And there's other pictures I've got of them with their car and showing my dad. Always had great cars. And at the time we lived on the Pfizer farm, I think we only had horses to use for the work. And I don't recall seeing it in the barn. I was still pretty small, but I think we had a mill in most of the farms we lived in until we went to Ohio. The reason I was telling you that is because of the feed sacks I'm going to show you later. But this is the farm where my dad sold, my grandpa sold his half of the farm, you know,
Oh, okay.
one night.
Right.
And the reason I think he sold it is this is his son-in-law's, George Watson's father. That's my dad on the far left. The
Okay.
man holding the nozzle up is Uncle Ben. He's the father of Uncle George. That's my brother and me, and that's my grandpa.
Wow.
We called him Papa all my
Papa.
life. And I think that is the reason Papa got excited, thinking it might be a good life to have a filling station, because that's when he sold his half of the farm. And then I have a picture of him in in front of his filling station, and some of the family This is my grandpa's filling station.
Wow.
And that is one of our, that's the one that lived behind us on the farm, the Pfizer farm. Kenneth and Ida Lou and Wilma was their little daughter, and we're just a few months apart in age.
Hmm.
So that's my grandpa, but this is the actual picture of him in front of the pumps. See how similar they look, but still different. See the look of that car on there on the left?
Yeah.
The age of the cars. It was just kind of an interesting little tidbit.
Man.
And
Get that a little better.
that was my grandpa. That was those maybe a year and a half, 2 years that he lived down there and had that filling station. And that is my brother and me. I'm sitting in the background, not the one sitting with the white hair, but the one leaning over.
Okay.
And Imogene, that's the little daughter of Uncle George and Thelma
Yeah.
Watson. So that was the same era of time on the Pfizer farm. And here's the picture of Uncle Charlie with the 2 alligators
Hey.
to prove to you that I was not fibbing.
You weren't fibbing. Very cool.
Yeah. And this is a picture of
Who gave you all these pictures? Your mom?
they were in our album always. They were in my mom's album, and I got
Wow.
to have some of those when. And this is a picture of me and my brother, and I still have that chair in my garage right now to this day.
Really?
Yes. See that rocking chair? That's
Wow.
me. One of the early days, like 9 months old, and I'm guessing that was at the Weaver farm, judging from the time frame and the look of that building. And that's my brother.
Try and get it to focus a little. There we go. Very nice.
And this is my brother and me at the same age of time. You can take that little thing off of there. Remember, I don't know how much, what do you call me, a preemie or what, but it didn't take me long to catch up. There you go. And then this is my dad's mother.
Wow. What was her name?
Her name was Hannah Emmons. And here is another clearer picture of her.
Wow.
Yeah, there aren't that many pictures of family back in those days. It was a luxury to take pictures. It cost a little bit of money to have them developed, you know.
Right.
And we weren't that great at taking pictures. But that's a good picture of her. She's the one who was mostly in a, and that is my brother and me on our wheels.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hey, those are pretty sweet wheels you got.
Yeah, they were pretty good. I wish I still had that little stroller. It was in the attic for a long time. And I'm trying to, this was a picture of my dad. I don't know whether to tell you about the history of him. It had to have happened before he was married, because I don't remember him ever going off on a trip on his own to any place after we were married. He was married to my mom, but I'll tell you a good story about him.
Yeah.
And that was me, like, I'm guessing that was the first grade.
Let's do a comparison.
I was so far behind, I did not
Beautiful.
know what was going on.
Wow.
Anyway, and this one's kind of washed out, but I'm guessing it was the second grade, so I'll leave that one till next time.
Okay.
Now, in those days, we did all of our. I told you about the hog killing,
Yeah.
and there are two kinds of lard. And when Mama referred to leaf lard, I have heard some of the people on YouTube talk about that now, and it makes a little more sense. The leaf lard was the luxurious lard that was like a fat around the internal organs, and it was just a nice, soft, kind of white, different. And the other one was more solid, that you cut up as parts of the meat, and the hog had a lot of weight on it. You just cut the excess fat off, and you take a big kettle and cook that down just very gradually and slowly, and melt it, and little cracklings, little chunks of cracklings would come up out of it, and you just save the liquid part, and it would become a solid. You have a big container that's probably 3 gallons, maybe 4, and it was a big tin tub kind of thing, and just go out and get a little container of lard when you needed it. You'd get it, and in the store later, you could buy little tubs of lard that looked like this size.
Really?
Yeah. But you'd bring into the house and have it in a crock and cover it with a cloth and use out of it until you needed more, and you'd go out and get out of the big tub. But that leaf lard was the luxurious, nice kind of lard to have.
What is that? What is that?
This?
Yeah.
This is a lard can that you could buy in a store.
How old is that?
I'm guessing it wasn't necessarily one of ours, but I recognized it in a junk store.
Oh, okay.
And it was what we bought years later when we stopped raising hogs.
Wow.
So that was a little lard can.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
And that was interesting. So anyway, we made our own butter also. You allowed the cream to come to the top, and then I looked for my butter paddle, but I couldn't find it. And what happens is you had a little churn. You could turn it called a daisy churn, and it just whipped the butter around really fast, and it separated the butter from the whey. And then when you got it into your little bowl, there would be little pockets of milk still in it. So you just press it down with this butter paddle and got all the excess moisture out, and it stayed at room temperature. And if you wanted to be fancy, I have a butter mold there, that brown thing over there.
Yeah.
Right over there by the vase.
Let me grab it.
And you would fill that with butter, and then when it got cool enough, we didn't have a refrigerator, you'd fill this thing with butter, and then you invert it and push the butter out.
Oh.
And it would be a nice formed.
It's got a design in there.
Oh yeah, it had a. They had this. Can you see that?
There's a little. Yeah, just a little bit. So it's sort of designed the butter.
Yeah, I made a nice imprint on the butter to make it fancy.
Push it out.
Oh yeah, I could do that. There you go.
Yeah. So just make a little imprint on her butter, make it look nice.
Yeah, make it fancy for company. So we had that, and that was a little extra interesting thing that most people didn't grow up doing. So let's see, what else did I want to tell you about? Oh, I know one thing. I was talking about the fact that we were bordering one of our relatives' farm on the Pfizer farm. And did I say this about climbing the fence? Oh, good. They built little areas with a post that you could climb up onto and get over a fence, and you had a little wooden support at the bottom to be able to put your feet on and climb over the fence, because if you put your feet on the wire part of the fence, it would eventually, kind of break it down. So there were places to cross over, and one of our relatives had the farm adjacent to ours, and we would go to that place where you cross over the fence, and then we'd have to be careful with the cattle that were in the field and always be kind of near a place we could get away and cross over if we needed to, because the cattle didn't always know who you were, and we didn't know how friendly they were. So we'd walk through the field back to their farm to visit, and we had to be careful as we'd keep an eye on the cattle, and we knew the way to get back there. It was all understood.
What would they do? Would they like kind of charge at you a little? Or?
They might come after you, but what we just didn't know, and we didn't take any chances. So that was a fun little thing I wanted to share with you. That was, but their farm was next door to us, and mind you, you did not go tootling around the countryside in a car, and you didn't ride a horse all that much because you had to saddle up the horse. And we had horses, but that was not what we did. We just walked through there and visited a while and came back home.
Oh, that's fun. And so
Yeah.
Were they your cousins or?
It was a relative of my dad. I'm going to say he was his nephew. Kenneth Emmons. I'm looking up the history on the Google thing. It's pretty interesting, but I need to figure out so I tell you accurately. But I just know we were always good friends. And their daughter's name was Wilma, and she was just a few months difference in age from me. So we were always good friends, and that's the only child they ever had. So that was the Pfizer farm. And as I said, we probably had a mill that stayed stationary on that farm, because I don't remember going to town to take the ears of corn. And Francis and Floyd, that's one of Mom's sisters. She was a sister at his second marriage. Always good friends, always wonderful. And they lived close to the end of our lane at another farm. See, people lived, and this is when I went to the Flemingsburg school with my brother, and we would go to their house and wait inside their little living room area until the bus came, because it was bitter cold. That's when I told you about the embarrassment of wearing snow pants and couldn't reach the bus step.
Couldn't get in the bus, yeah.
Yeah.
How big was the bus?
I'm guessing not that much different. It wasn't a giant bus, though. Did I tell you about the snowstorm?
I don't think so.
Oh my goodness. This was at the same farm. We didn't have telephones, remember? And we were allowed to be out of school early one day because a storm was coming. And we were on the bus, and I kid you not, this is not an exaggeration. One of the girls asked me what I would do if we got stranded. And now I realize how small I was, but I was telling her that, and she thought it was cute, I guess, and was telling the bus driver. And not more than a minute after that, the bus went off the road, and we could not go any further. So we were stranded in a snowstorm.
Wow.
And I remember somebody carried me for a little ways. They were just being gallant and carried me because we were walking through snow, but it was on the way toward the direction the bus would normally go. So we were able to go to someone's house that was kind of on the way, and other people had to be able to go to the farm and tell mom and dad because they knew where to come or checked all the different houses and found us, took us back home, and that was that. But we literally went into a snowdrift and got stranded, and that was.
And the bus driver just took you guys and.
Yeah, but it was not her fault. That it was a woman. I remember that, and it was quite a thing to remember because it didn't happen again.
Wow.
But that was the same school. That was the Flemingsburg School, which I told you last week. You had the secondary building where they did, like the hog. I was a fog in the first grade. I don't know how I ever got through the first grade.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, time frame wise, the next school that I went to with my brother was Lewisburg, and that was the Fred Adams farm. Now, these places are not very far from each other. The farms are not. It's just a community of not great distances that you move, but we lived on the Fred Adams farm, and another little tidbit, I've got some whole different pictures to show. It's more interesting about that one. But I must have been in the second and third grades there. And my brother was a year ahead of me, of course. And we had a thing interesting on that farm. We had a phone there. If I remember, we had electricity too. But another interesting thing I was going to tell you about is we had a thing called an ice house, which I've never really known about other than there. And it was like a building that was about the size of this living room, and it was made out of wood. But the interesting thing was the interior, the base of the area would be like dug out, like not as deep as another floor, but it was pretty deep. And what they would do is in the winter, they would save ice that formed on the creeks. We're talking about cold back there.
Yeah.
They would save the ice that was formed on the creek, the surface, and put it down in the ground and cover it up. And also, it was a very common thing to go to town, and they have a place where they sold big chunks of ice. I'm guessing it was probably 10 inches by, it was like a rectangle kind of thing, about 10 inches width and then about 12 or 14 inches long in big squares. And a square is not a oblong thing, but it was in chunks.
Yeah.
And so the ice would last in that ice house for months until it got to be really hot, and then of course the air outside would gradually thaw everything out and it was done. So we didn't really save ice all that much, but when we'd go to town, we would buy a chunk of ice or bring one of those chunks to the house with this thing. It's called an ice tong. You can see how it worked. As it gripped around the ice, it would grip it tight and grab onto it, and hold on. It was easy as pie.
Wow.
So we did that, and
so where would you put your ice when you brought it home?
well, we had a plan with it. I should bring in my ice cream freezer. One of the things that we did a lot of was made homemade ice cream. And if you put salt on the ice, it evidently lowers, I think I learned this in school, It lowers the temperature and causes it to melt and to be a lower temperature. You had this ice cream freezer that you turned with a crank, and you put ice all around this cylinder that was on the inside. The cylinder turned around, and then there were paddles in the middle of that went the opposite direction. It caused ice cream to freeze within 15-20 minutes.
Wow.
But you had to, and then the ice was lost after that because it melted, But it would keep it for a good while, couple of 3 hours. And the longer you allowed it to sit in that really cold water that formed in the ice cream freezer, it would kind of firm up like you get that ice cream in the stores, But we would save, this is interesting, a cup of cream out of different cans so it didn't make our cream testing go down when they measured it at the place where we sold it.
Yeah.
So you only took like a cup out of each can, but we had 4 or 5 cans, and we'd save up, if we knew we were going to make ice cream, we'd save up that cream for like maybe a day, maybe 2 different milkings, and it worked out really well. I'll tell you,
Wow.
It's some fine stuff, that ice cream.
It was really good.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, that was my story about the ice house. That was very unique, and I've never really been around any other places that had that. It was just, and the farm that we lived on, the next place, the place that I went to school in Lewisburg, was back a lane that was probably 2 miles also. And I'll have some pictures next week to show you of my brother. It's just a treasure. He was acting as if he was pumping up a tire on a Model A Ford.
Oh, okay.
And I'll show you that picture. But that was that farm. And we often, when they grew the hay, sometimes it would be a stack. You just keep mounding it up. Sometimes we would have people come in with a hay baler, and you would have a wire that you'd put through one end of the machine at the time when the hay was being pumped through, it was being fed through, and it wound up making a bale of hay, which was probably 2 feet around this way, square but long.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way they picked up those bales of hay, which were pretty hefty, was with this thing right here. You just stick the hook in to the end, and it allowed you to have the ability to hook the hay with one hand. You didn't, otherwise you'd be holding it with both hands and
Right.
nothing to grab onto. And this is called a hook, a hay hook.
Into the sides with one,
Yeah.
and then the other hand would just kind of lift up. You
Yeah.
didn't have 2 of these things?
Well, you would just pick it up and throw it to where you wanted it to go, and they would stack it. And then on the top, they would put like loose hay and then put a tarp over the top so it wouldn't rain on it, because it rained there all the time, So that was my hay hook.
Wow.
And they sent that out when they sent my dad's little farm equipment stuff. And
That's your dad's?
oh yeah,
That's
that
your
was
dad's hay
that was
hook?
from our farm. Both these things are from our farm.
So your dad used that?
Oh yeah, my dad used
Wow.
that. And
That's amazing.
the other thing I was going to share is the ironing
Okay.
that was done. And nobody really fussed about it or talked about it. You see how heavy that
Yeah,
is?
it is pretty heavy.
That is an iron that you would have 2 or maybe 3 of these at a time, sitting on the stove, coal and wood stove, getting nice and hot. And as it would start to cool down, you'd grab another fresh one that was still good and hot to keep ironing. They did the shirts that way.
Show that to the camera.
Oh, it's even heavy. I'm getting a workout doing
You
that.
can put it down. I know it's heavy.
You see it okay?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Anyway, and one of our neighbors, it shows you how old those irons were. They even repaired an iron. See where it was broken off?
Wow.
And then they probably took it to a welder or an ironsmith and had a new handle put on there.
Yeah, wow.
So that was from Purdon's farm.
Huh.
Yeah, next door, that's over in Ohio. And the other thing I was going to say is, this is my mother's bean pot. It's not that bad, sugar.
Okay.
This is my mother's bean pot. I should oil it down. But this rounded part,
Yeah.
the stove was made with a thing called, it had rings in it. And you would take a portion of the center out. And then this would sit in the stove down in the fire. And the fire could be fairly low as far as heavy flame, and it would still keep cooking.
Wow.
So I need to oil it down because I had it oiled and it rained on it, and I'll fix it up again.
Wow, very cool.
But that's the way we cooked. So you can imagine how come my mom was so thrilled to have a pressure cooker, to have something save a little bit of time when she had to boil things on the stove for like an hour to do the canning. Yeah. And of course, this is some people will know this, but when the jars would seal, you'd have the temperature really hot for several minutes, and then when it would seal, the lid would go click and it would make a vacuum, and that meant it was good and saved and everything.
Man.
Killed all the bacteria in it.
And you speaking of canning, I mean, you've canned tomatoes, right?
Oh, yeah. Tomatoes don't take as long to make safe and work well. I don't know how many. I should look in the canner section. But probably, I'm going to say 25 to 35 minutes. And you put it at a certain temperature to make sure that it's killed all the bacteria and done the work right.
Now, how did you guys measure the temperature back then? I mean, did you guys have thermometers?
Well, the canner, the reason this is such a luxury to have a pressure cooker, the canner, you just brought it to a boil and then boiled it. And sometimes you'd have to do that for like a couple hours on some things. Like I said, corn took a long time to cause it to keep. I don't know why that was. But tomatoes were quick. Things like sweet potatoes you didn't can. We didn't can. We just kept them in the winter, like the regular potatoes, kept them from freezing. And a little tidbit of interest is one thing we always had for breakfast was biscuits, always had gravy. But on the table, there were certain items. And I can remember, as long as I can recall being at home, even when I graduated from high school, two little items that I'm going to show you today that were in my mom's kitchen cabinet. That means the cabinet that's like that one, only you have it at your house, the white one.
Sure, yeah.
Well, three things. That apple that was on the top of there was always sitting down in the open space.
Is that the apple?
Mm-hmm. That apple right there.
Let me go grab it.
Okay. It's got a loose little lid on the top there if you want to be careful.
So
it's a cookie jar.
This is the one on your table?
Yes.
Okay.
No, not on the table, but on the kitchen cabinet.
Okay.
There, this cookie jar.
It's got a lid for it?
Yeah. We've got a lid, and that has stayed intact all those years. I'm pretty pleased to have that thing still working.
Wow. And so what would you do with it? What was in it?
Well, we did not make cookies all that often, but it was just there it had been a gift, and Mom just treasured it and took good care of it. that she kept it that way, and all grateful. But tell me if I'm too loud over here now.
Perfect. That's perfect.
Okay. Mom would make jams and jellies, always. We always had the ability to open a jar of strawberry jam or apple jelly or whatever, or preserves of some kind. But we always had this little thing right here, and it was filled with molasses. So that if anybody wanted molasses on their biscuit, it was filled, and it had a lid. Now, this is not the one that fits. This is a little bit too small, you can see.
Yeah.
But I found this in a store one day, and I says, oh, I need to check and see if that fits.
That's pretty good, Grandma.
Pretty good.
Good find.
We never had any trouble with bugs or anything because the lid covered down really well. And I don't know the history behind why this was a treasure, but it was like this. This little green thing was always in our kitchen cabinet on the top shelf or the second shelf. There are two little tiny shelves, and it held our plates and our cups, all we had and all we needed. But this little thing, I don't know, it must have been something from her history that was special to her, that she kept that. And since then, I found the intact one in an antique store with the lid, when I keep it sitting over there on the little shelf right there. But I left the lid off because this is the way hers was. She didn't have the lid. Somehow it had gotten broken. So I found another one, and the lid, I found an odd lid a different time. So I've got one for each of my kids.
Hey.
That's going to be a keepsake. That is a memory of what was in our kitchen cabinet always.
Family heirloom.
Yeah, that's
Nice.
funny. But that's the way it was.
I'm gonna grab that
And
for you.
I showed you my bean pot, didn't I? Yeah, I
Yes.
showed you. So, oh yeah, and we also made our own soap. This is
Wow.
called lye soap, and sometimes in the antique malls you can find someone who sells lye soap. Wasn't really fancy, but made out of lard. The meat drippings.
Yeah.
And lye was in the recipe. If I find that recipe, I'll let you know.
Huh.
But we made our own lye soap.
And it cleans pretty good.
Oh, yeah, it cleans fine. It doesn't make big bubbles like Dawn and stuff like that.
Okay.
But it cleans, yes, very clean, and we
Wow.
never had a problem. And the other thing is, I believe that the different places that we lived, we still went to the same location of a church. It's called Helena, and that was the plate right there that I'm going to show you. This plate right here.
Okay.
Yeah, that is the church. This is the church where we went most of my life in Kentucky. Helena Methodist Church. I can still remember walking up those little steps, and
Wow.
is
that an actual picture, or what is that?
yeah.
How did they get that on there?
I do not know how they do that kind of thing, but it got to be a commemorative thing, and my mom had it, and I thought, oh, I recognize that. And of course,
Look at that.
yep,
Helena, Kentucky, 1915
1967.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So, and how are we doing on time? Are we about done for?
No, we're good. We get as much longer as you like.
Oh, I need to get some more pictures because we're on the Adams farm now.
Okay.
And I had some pictures that were pertinent to that.
Yeah, no problem. We can.
So,
You want to pause?
yeah, if you can do that.
We'll go ahead and pause.